So much. I see a wonderful audience here. Can we have a huge round of applause? A bigger one, bigger one.
Hello.
We need all the positive energies because we're going to be talking about the bad men of Bollywood. A quick introduction, the gentleman to my right, prolific writer. And when it comes to cinema and the trivias and the stories that make it all the more fascinating, Balaji Vittal needs no introduction. His latest book is Pure Evil, the Bad Men of Bollywood. And I could not talk about anything else except Indian cinema. And especially when it's retro, especially when it comes to the villains. Let's have a fascinating discussion. But before that, ladies and gentlemen, I need to warn you, we're going to be locking the doors right here. There's a poisonous gas that could escape at any given point of time, and we're going to take you hostage for the next 50 minutes. On a lighter note, nothing like that is going to happen. Okay. When you see a character on screen, and I'm talking about a hero. The hero is supposed to be moral. He's supposed to stand up for what is right always. He's supposed to be the good guy. But yet there is something so magical about a villain that makes him stand out. The villain is character. The mannerisms, the sheer style, the swag, the dialogues, the entry, the background score, all of this, is it because of the actor, because of the script, or because we simply love the villain for the independence that he has to do what he has to do on screen? I mean, he kills people. He smuggles. He's immoral. He's not supposed to be someone you look up to and inspire. This book, ladies and gentlemen, if I may describe this in one word, is a Rogue Gallery walkthrough, completely. You know, you look at all the villains of Indian cinema from 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, 60s. It just goes on and on. My first question to you, Dada, is how tough was it researching for a book like this? You know, when you're talking about evil, when you're talking about something that's bad, and when you had so much history to cover, tell us something about your book, Pure Evil, the Bad Men of Bollywood.
Well, even before research, I struggled for 2 or 3 years even to get the story right. I didn't know what I was going to write. What do you write about villains? So you can write about R.D. Burman. You can write about S.D. Burman. What do you write about villains? Because they are the antagonists. They are the bad guys. Now, how can you make them the center of the story? They are supposed to be at the back end of the story. You've got to bring them in the front end of the story without trying to sound as if you're justifying their deeds. Secondly, I started researching by interviewing these actors and the directors and the script writers. But once I had got their interview transcripts, that couldn't be a story in itself. So then, based on some consultation, then finally took me some time to sort of open that big black box of villainy, take out all the goodies, and arrange them in decent folders, with each folder standing for each genre of villainy. So that took me quite a while, and then I had to map it to the timeline, because not all decades had all sorts of villainy. Some existed in a few, and others didn't. So research, I would say, was slightly easier than even getting the story right.
There's this beautiful start to this book, and if I may add, when I was reading this book, it gives you an idea about the landscape of India. You know, in 1930s, a different kind of villain. In 1940s, a different kind of villain. 50s, we had a completely different style of filmmaking. 60s, 70s, 80s, and then the magical 90s. There is this special segment I'd like you to talk about. I'm sure all of you would agree. You know, if I say the word Tom Alter, the first thing that comes to your mind is this foreigner guy with a hunter in his hands, right? Yes or no? Yeah, and always the same dialogues. You Indians, tumko kaam karna bilkul nahi aata hai. And then hitting that chabuk with that background score. It's been done to death like for such a long time. And this started, in fact, I got to know this from the book. Some of the villains were actually censored, you know, by the British government, pre-independence, because they did not want the Britishers to be shown in a bad light. And that's what this book does to you. It has a treasure house of trivia. The one thing that I liked about this book, and it's a very good point that Balaji makes, is the first... Yes, okay. I'd like you to welcome the man who needs absolutely no introduction, Javed Saab. Thank you so much. Javed Sahib, it's a privilege and honor to be here, sharing the stage with you. We were just talking about the villains, about how in Shatranj Ke Khiladi, you know, Satyajit Ray was the first filmmaker who brilliantly used, the concept of a foreigner villain in a very intelligent way. Now, suddenly you had two people who had to, overthrow the Nawab, but they were not doing it with whips or hunters or with a sense of violence or aggression. They were doing it with their minds. They were strategizing, how to get him out. Balaji, if you'd like to talk about that particular chapter.
Yeah. Shatranj Ke Khiladi, the foreigner villains, the British, it was pure strategy. Removing the Nawab of Awadh was a pure strategy. He was a mere pawn. Ek Shatranj ka mohra tha wo. So you don't have to go about whipping people, right? Or abusing you bloody Indians or whatever. You don't have to do all that. Just quietly remove him. That's it. And if you look at the backroom conversations of these Captain Weston and the other guy, Outram, they say, I know what you're doing is not very fair, but it's got to be done. It's a bad job, but needs to be done. That showed the maturity of how someone like a Satyajit Ray can craft the characters. There is villainy, but it's a part of the strategy. It's not just a foul language or physical aggression or nothing like that. That showed a lot of maturity. So that's why I felt that as a foreigner villain, that was very different, a British foreigner villain.
Javed Saab, I always had this question. In all my years of radio, I never had a chance to interview you. So I have always been curious as a kid when we were watching Mr. India on VCD. Mogambo kis country ko belong karta tha? And who gave him the passport to come to our country and wreak such havoc and torture on us? I've always been very fascinated, as a small kid about which nationality Mogambo belonged to.
Could you tell me what was the profession of James Bond's father?
Good one.
What he used to do you know that?
Quite frankly, no one knows.
Thank you. That's the answer.
And Javed Saab, just going forward with the discussion, the villains of Indian cinema. Every hero needs a villain. That's how the story moves forward. Without the villain, there is no hero and there is no purpose and there is no story. In the 40s, a different style of villains emerged, the zamindars. Then it slowly became the politicians, the gangsters, your friend who would cheat you in the business. And then, you had the smart villains with the gadgets as time changed. Would it be fair to say, and I would request both of you to throw some light on this, the changing villains of Bollywood have reflected the changing face of India, the social economic fabric of India?
Of course it's true, and this is something I've said many times, that if you make the list of Indian villains, you can write the socio-political or socio-economic history of last 70, 80 years. When India was coming out of feudal times, the villain was the zamindar, the Thakur. Then as the urbanization started, the villain became the slumlord or the underworld boss of the city. And then lo and behold, after a little while, that slumlord or that underworld boss became the hero. And earlier before that, there was, as we believed in a socialistic pattern of society, and we believed that, prosperity is on the next page of the calendar. So the villain was the rich man. Life was simple. Poor people were good people, rich people were bad people. And the mill owner or the boss of the company or the money lender and so on, they were the villains. Then after the villain who was from the slum or the underworld became the hero, the police and the politician for a while, they were villains. And when the cynicism started rising in the society, and then for a while, because of problems with the neighbors, Pakistani terrorists were villains for a short time. Then we got bored of them also. So now at the moment, we are devoid of villains. Because that rich man, that underworld man or whatever, they are our ideals now. We want to be millionaires. We want to own the companies. So then who do we call the villain? What is unusual about Indian villain? Leave aside the villain he was talking about in Shatranj Ke Khiladi. That villain had come from Bengal, so he was subtle. Not because he was a Britisher. No, sorry. If he would have been a Bombayite Britisher, then he would say, "You damn fool!" But since this Britisher was born in Bengal, the villain of Shatranj Ke Khiladi, so he had all the Bengali qualities. But on the other hand, what I rather appreciate, admire about the Indian villain, there are many villains in our lives, in our society, but they don't own their villainy. They justify themselves. They think that they pretend to be moralistic people. Suppose you have given me some money and I don't want to return it because I'm a cheat. I won't say I'm a cheat and I am swindling her. I won't say that. I'll say the way she spoke to me, I didn't like that. I was going to return her money, but now I won't because, she insulted me. I will not forget. I'll justify my villainy, but not the Indian villain of Bombay. He's so proud of his villainy. He's so arrogant about it. And bad people, hum log milte hain, then your friends tell you, don't trust this person. He is a very untrustworthy person. He's a cheat, he's a crook. Nahi, he's a good man, meets me so nicely. That's what happens in our life. But Indian villain can be, from miles you can see that he's a villain. He is not hiding his villainy at all. Even जो बात सीधी भी कही जा सकती है, ऐसी जगह ले जाके मारूंगा कि पानी नहीं मांगा. तो अरे भाई तू इतनी मेहनत से क्यों? Why are you trying to prove that you are a villain? So he is so arrogant about his villainy. But there are certain things I would like to point out. Look at the cover of this book. These villains who have become immortal, like Amrish Puri in Mr. India, Gabbar in Sholay, Ajit in Yadon Ki Bharat, or say, Pran Sahab was a villain, but you can't think of one particular character. But with Amrish Puri, you will think of Mr. India. With Amjad, you will think of Gabbar. With Ajit, you will think of Zanjeer and Yadon Ki Bharat. They are memorable villains. They are admired. They are evil people, but they have one quality common in all three of them. They are not lechers. They are not lechers. No lecher can be a memorable villain. It's strange. Audience rejects him. They may see him in the film, but they won't admire him. They admire villains who are asexual. You can see that. They are law unto themselves. They are so self-sufficient. They don't need anybody else. That's why they are asexual. You think about it. They are complete. And why children, have you ever thought, small children, why they admired and loved Gabbar, a ruthless, perverse, sadistic killer? Why? You see, all of us have a Gabbar to some degree within us. But that Gabbar is suppressed by our morality, by our conscience, by the fear of law, by the pressure of our peers and society and so on. We can't imagine doing certain things which we fantasize, sometimes at least. We admire the freedom of these people. They are free of morality. They are free of conscience. They are free of every law. They are a law unto themselves. This freedom, this ruthlessness without any conscience is perfect, and you respect that perfection. That's what I feel.
So I do so totally resonate with that. So imagine, go back to your school days. You were told to be a good boy and a good girl. There's always this one character in your classroom who stands up to the teacher and the principal. He's not afraid of failing. He's not afraid of cheating. He does all the wrong things, and you look at him and you do admire him. Why? ये courage कहाँ से आता है इसका? And that's the same thing, that happens when you see Mogambo or Dr. Dang. That fearlessness, that you are the law. There's nothing, over you. You really control everyone around you with that kind of sheer energy. Javed Sab, you've been very instrumental. When I say villains, top of the mind, Mogambo comes to the mind. Top of the mind, you have Shakal who comes to the mind. You have Gabbar. There is a section in this book that has a beautiful story about how Anupam Kher Saab actually, shot for Mr. India for literally 2 to 3 months, close to about 40 to 50% of the movie. And then Amrish Puri Saab stepped in right after Indiana Jones released. Could you share some light on that?
No, but it's not true. Anupam Kher was never in Mr. India. Anupam Kher was the villain in Roop Ki Rani Choro Ka Raja. With proper results, of course. But he was never in Mr. India, never. Right from the beginning, it was Amrish Puri. Maybe there is some confusion because in the next film, he was the villain. I must confess, although it won't go in my favor, that I thoroughly enjoy writing villains' dialogue. All the sadism that is stored in me, all the viciousness which I cannot take out, that goes into the characters of these villains. I thoroughly enjoy this. I watch myself writing the dialogue. Oh God, what a mean man. So, I love villains that way. It's writing dialogue for villain is a good catharsis.
Javed Saab, and you met so many writers in course of your research for the book also. Do you agree with this, that when you write a certain script for, the hero, you always have certain limitations? Ki hero aisa hona chahiye, waisa hona chahiye. There are certain moral values that they have to adhere to. But the villain is free. He has no spectrum. He has no boundaries. He's unrestricted. That's the right word. He can do whatever he wants to. So, Javed Saab, does the freedom also come in as a writer when you're writing about the characters?
Yeah, of course. I mean, this freedom, because you are thinking from the point of view of this character. Actually, a dialogue writer is also a kind of a latent actor. You are writing the dialogue of this character or that character, or X or Y or Z. Every time you identify with that character. And if you don't identify with that character and don't own that character, you will not be able to write the right lines. When I was saying asexual, I remember suddenly now that I should have quoted then, but now I remember. There was a dialogue in Shan where the villain was Shakal, played by Kulbhushan Kharbanda. So they kidnap Rakhi, who is the wife of a very important police officer, Shiv Kumar, who is played by Sunil Dutt. And Rakhi is brought to this fancy den of Mr. Shakal. And he says that till your husband, you're actually a piece of cheese, so that rat will come for you. And till then, you will remain with me here. So she gets slightly tense. कि ये क्या कह रहा है कि मैं यहाँ यहीं रहूँगी 2-3 दिन. She smiles. She said, नहीं, Mrs. Shiv Kumar, आप फिक्र मत कीजिए. मेरे पास ऐसी बेकार बातों के लिए वक्त ही नहीं है. तो ये ultimate insult है. आप don't flatter yourself that I'm trying to harass you or rape you. No, sorry. I have no such intentions.
Javed Sab, there's this one question. I don't know how many of you know this, but in, I think, 60s, late 60s it was, when Javed Saab saw Amjad Khan in a play, for the first time. And he just casually happened to mention it to Salim Saab, कि मैंने इस बंदे को देखा, बहुत अच्छा है. And you know this back-end story behind Sholay. Danny Saab was finalized, the dates did not happen, and something or the other did not work out. वो कहते हैं ना, जिसके नसीब में जो होता है वही होता है जो मंजूरी ऊपर वाला चाहता है. After all these years, Javed Sab, would you like to share the story how Salim Saab just recollected, out of the blue that there was this guy you were talking about, let's call him for, screen test, Gabbar ke liye.
Being a rationalist, first of all, I'll protest if you think that the casting director of Sholay was God. Now let's come to the point. In 1963, I was in BA final, and I had from Bhopal, Vikram University, I represented the university in group discussion in Talkatora Gardens Youth Festival. There used to be a youth festival every year in Talkatora Garden. That at that time in 63, perhaps we in India had perhaps 55 or 53 universities. So all the universities used to set their contingent of say 20, 25 students. And Amjad Khan had come from Bombay University with a play, Ae Mere Watan Ke Logo. And there I saw him for the first time. He was also a student that time. And he had played, the play was about the Chinese war, India-China war. And he had played an Indian Sikh officer, and he was brilliant on the stage. So I remembered that. And when I came to Bombay after 2 years in 65. Then I met Salim Saab. Then after a little while, in 69, 70, we became partners. So I used to tell him that Jain Saab's younger son, Amjad, I have seen him on the stage, he was very good on the stage. He's a fine actor. It got over. Then we were making Sholay. Denny was signed. Denny's costumes were made and everything. And suddenly, Denny faced a problem, a dilemma, that Feroz Khan had asked for the same dates to shoot the film Dharmatma in Afghanistan. Now, Denny had a choice to go to Bangalore or to Afghanistan. He chose Afghanistan. So we were left without a villain, and within 2 months we were going to shoot. So obviously at that time Premnath ji was very big, so was Pran Saab, but they were extremely busy people. So expecting that they would give us dates and bulk dates within 2 months was asking for the moon. So suddenly it's strange that, I had seen his performance. Salim Saab had not. But it was Salim Saab who suggested that आप उसकी बहुत तारीफ करते थे जैन साहब के लड़के की, तो उसको ले लें, नया ही कोई लेना है तो ऐसे ठीक है चलिए. So then he called him and introduced him to Mr. Ramesh Sippy. Mr. Ramesh Sippy in our office premises took his screen test, liked him, and what they say, and the rest is history. So, okay. So that is how it happened. But what's strange that I had seen his work, but ultimately the suggestion came from Salim Saab.
And the way these characters have also shaped up over the years in our consciousness, would like to go back to Balaji there and look back at the trajectory of villains that you have covered in your book. Special mention for the dacoits. The villain is not so villainous after all. That is not so bad after all. There's always this one villain when you establish a backstory, wo kyun villain bana, system se kaise hara. And as Javed Saab says, even the dacoit has certain values that they look up to. I would just like to make it a two-point question. And how beautifully, even in a movie like Sholay, the idea of a caste system is so beautifully established. These issues are raised, which are the real villains to the society, if I may add. Balajita, would you like to, add as to Vinod Khanna being a dacoit, the villains who were also good on screen? Yeah. And we turned out to love those characters also.
The dacoits were basically the creation of the zamindars. Thanks to zamindars, the dacoits happened, right? Because there was total lawlessness, the police was timid, right? और यहाँ से उस चौकी तक खबर पहुँचते पहुँचते मुझे जीने दो में वो लूट के चले भी गए, तो पता भी नहीं चला, right? एक चौकी से फोन घुमा रहा है, तब तक लूट के चला भी गया वो. So there had to be those local dacoits to actually protect the people. So there were the black dacoits like Gabbar, who had no backstory, who had nothing to justify. But then there were those good Samaritans, the Robin Hoodian sort of dacoits like the ones you see in Mujhe Jeene Do, or those films, who are actually protectors. Or even If you look at Phulan Devi, what they do is they go there and say that we'll protect you. Or if you look at Pan Singh Tomar, the one that Irfan Khan played. So kya hua? He's a national champion. He's a sports champion. He's an Asian Games participant. He has won medals for the country. He has won national medals. But he has got no one to protect him. There is a scene where the local district collector says, ये चंबल की इशू है, तुम लोग सॉर्ट आउट कर लो. ये चंबल है, हम यहाँ पे नहीं आते, तुम लोग खुद देख लो. अब वो क्या करेगा बेचारा? So there were those Robin Hoodian villains who had to stand up and stand like a vigilante. Okay, so there were two dacoits within one dacoit at the price of one. What I also covered the dacoits, if you look at the chapter, it's called Outlaws. So it's not that the dacoits are only from Chambal, not even from India. If you look at a film like Abdullah, right, who's the villain out there? Danny, right? That's an Arabian Nights flavor to the whole Outlaws. There were those urban outlaws like 36 घंटे, right? क्या करते हैं? So you know, तीन लोग आके they hold the whole house hostage. It's like Gabbar holding them hostage. Just that ये शहर में हो रहा है, गांव में नहीं हो रहा है.
That reminds me, Javed Saab, just coming back to Sholay, I remember in the documentary you'd actually mentioned about how none of the leading stars were happy with the location of Sholay when they landed in the first place, because the dacoits are actually supposed to be from Rajasthan or Madhya Pradesh, you know, from those areas. And here we are shooting, and suddenly the villains were in, I mean, there was a completely different location with rocks and the kind of village to the Sholay setup.
Yeah, that's true. And this was Mr. Ramesh Sippy's choice, and I think it was a good choice because there were huge rocks that gave toughness to the terrain, but at the same time there was greenery, so it gave some kind of a balance also. But it's not only harshness. Sholay covered many emotions and a huge spectrum of different relationships and emotions. Perhaps that's why it became so successful. It's my guess, I don't know. But it ceased to be a typical dacoit movie. Like in an average dacoit movie at that time, the dacoit used to have a black long kurta and dhoti and a long tika on his face and a safa and a belt of bullets and a gun. और वो जाने से पहले काली माँ की सौगंध ऐसे कुछ वो बोलता था. And then he used to go. So this man was in different attire also. So his whole attitude and his stance was very different from the regular dacoits of the film, of other films.
मुझे याद है जावेद साहब ने एक बार कहा था, किताब में भी लिखा है, Gabbar hailed from a place somewhere between Mexico and Uttar Pradesh. He comes from somewhere in between these two coordinates.
That's very true. That's very true. I'm surprised that you know it. Maybe you must have mentioned in the book also. When I was doing the dialogue, so I wanted him to be slightly different from rest of the character, because if you see films like, say, Magnificent Seven or Five Men Army or any other picture by who's the director of, say, Good, Bad, and Ugly?
Sergio Leone.
What was the name? Sergio Leone. So this character, the villain, stands out for his accent also, his style. Ali Wallach used to play these roles quite often. Being a Mexican bandit, his pronunciation, he won't be able to pronounce T. Instead of T, he'll say T. So he would be slightly different. And what was I noticed about these Mexican bandits in different films, that what was fascinating about them was their unpredictability. Now this man is speaking on this base. Next line will be a whisper or a scream. You don't know. Whether he'll laugh or he'll become very compassionate. I mean, ostensibly, very sympathetic. His attitude should be unpredictable. That was in my mind. And by changing his accent, I gave him a touch of Awadhi, not pure Awadhi. Meanwhile, Mr. Ramesh Sippy had this perfect imitation. He could imitate that Mexican bandit and his graph so very competently. So I made him speak again and again. The bandit dialogue. It had nothing to do with Sholay. And gradually I grasped that rhythm or the lack of rhythm, whatever you may call it. Now the character of Sambha was not in the script. There was no Sambha in the screenplay. While writing the first scene, क्या होता है, बड़े लोग जो होते हैं उनके जो साइकोफैंट्स होते हैं वो इसलिए होते हैं कि बहुत सारी बातें साइकोफैंट बोले. बताओ मैंने क्या किया था उस दिन, तो वो बताता है. साहब तो इतने बिगड़ गए, साहब ने तो ऐसा कहा, तो वो उसके लिए होते हैं. खुद नहीं बताया मैंने ये किया था, वो क्या किया मैंने उस आदमी को, क्या दिया था, तो वो बताता मैंने ये, साहब ने तो ऐसा कर दिया. तो एग्जैक्टली फॉर दैट पर्पज व्हेन ही सेज कि सरकार, इंस्टेड ऑफ सेइंग हिमसेल्फ, सरकार ने मुझ पे 50,000 इनाम रखा है, तो छोटी बात लगती है, अच्छा नहीं लगता कि वो खुद कह रहा है. जरा सांभा बताओ सरकार कितना इनाम रखी है, तो वो बोलता है पूरे सुना. तो ये गिमिक सिर्फ 50,000 की वजह से एक सांभा कैरेक्टर डायलॉग में डाल दिया. बट व्हेन आई डिड इट, अरे ओ सांभा, और वो कहता मैं ये तो कैची है, इसको लेट मी रिमेन लॉयल टू इट. होता क्या है, यू टेक वन थिंग, what are designs? One form repeated again and again and again and again becomes a design. That is design. So you, while writing in the beginning, when you are writing a character, in the beginning you find a line, this is the line which will be the hook line of this character. अब इसको नहीं छोड़ना. तो फिर उसको यूज करते रहे हम पिक्चर में. बेचारा सांभा फिर कभी नहीं बोला. Samba had only 3 words in the whole film, पूरे 50,000. That's all. Then he kept silent, sitting there. ये बोलता रहता, अरे ओ सांभा, ये सांभा बेचारा कुछ जवाब नहीं देता था.
बॉलीवुड से हमने कई वर्ड्स सीखे हैं, जालसाजी, षड्यंत्र, साजिश, and all these deadly words. The names of the villains itself, Gabbar, Samba, Mogambo. I liked how, just in line with what Javed Saab says, I always used to think, जब मैं Mr. India देखता था, Mogambo looked like Mandrake the magician to me. A little bit like, that Willy guy who wants to take on and rule the world with a Hitler-like personality. And he's not afraid to plant a bomb, in a toy, kill little girls, smuggle. But when he said Mogambo khush hua, it's almost like he referred to his alter ego. He never said मैं खुश हुआ, he said Mogambo khush hua. He was referring to that alter ego, that villain in his personality.
Kings speak about themselves in third person. The king, जहाँ पनाह को, तो वो अपने को नहीं बोलते कि मैंने ऐसे है. तो वो अपने बारे में भी थर्ड पर्सन की तरह बोलते हैं. और हमारी फिल्म इंडस्ट्री में भी कुछ लोग हैं बॉम्बे में जो अपने बारे में ऐसे बोलते हैं जैसे अपने फादर के बारे में बोल रहे हो. तो वो भी अपने बारे में थर्ड पर्सन करके बोलते हैं, अपना ही नाम लेके. मैं उनका नाम नहीं लेना चाहते मैं. और फिर जावेद वहाँ गया, मैं हूँ जावेद और मैं ही बोल रहा हूँ. आप सोचिए जब जावेद ऐसा करेगा तो ऐसे, दैट इज हाउ टू टॉक.
That's so nice. Balaji sir, when I was reading your book, there were certain emotional stories also. What makes this book a little different is it's not just about villains and how they portrayed their act on the screen. Special reference to Manorama. The chapter was exceedingly emotional for someone who was a big star in the 60s, was making some amount of money. In the later years of life, reduced to an absolute nobody. But I think that's how destiny and life works. Would you like to share some emotional stories about the villains that you've written, how they are right now, the state of mind, and how they look back at these wonderful, iconic roles that they played?
Yeah, the Manorama character the actor that you mentioned, many years later, she had to land up at another actress's place and ask for a handout. She was asking for financial help. Same thing happened with Chandra Mohan in the 1930s and 40s. One of the most accomplished villain actors. He played some very good roles, but then he again fell in hard times. But I guess people of late have learned to take care of their money and sort of say, ki, bhai, this is not going to last forever, right? So let's take care of it. And I think at the beginning of the discussion, we said that we don't have those Gabbar, Mogambo, Shakal, and those big, larger-than-life villains anymore. If you look at it, the change that has happened post-2000s, if you look at the Dhoom series, Players, Cash, and these films, यहाँ पे हीरो और विलन को बराबरी का मौका. Both are equally handsome. Both are equally, and that is a technologically advanced villains, right? They wear the Batman suits and jump off, tall buildings, and
they had all the gadgets to hack computers.
Yeah, in the Namibian desert, कुछ चोरी हो रहा है वहाँ पे, Hrithik Roshan. So look at the guys who play these villains. They're equally accomplished, and they don't come really in the grasp of the hero who's the cop. John Abraham escapes. You don't know what happened to him. Dhoom 2, Dhoom 3, same thing. They escape, they give the slip. Or even the psychological villains, like if you look at Ux, okay, or you look at this film called Rahasya, okay, there is a seriality. It leaves you with something hanging, saying that this guy can come back again. He can come back and haunt you. So there's been a big change in the entire landscape of the way villains have been portrayed.
And that's like post 2000, post Dhoom, when this thing happened where lead actors were not afraid to take those negative roles also.
I would say that came in 1990s with Shah Rukh Khan. Right?
Yes, I was just coming to that. The obsessive lover, starting off with Basigar, going back to win his father's company, and then portraying the obsessive lover's role in Dar.
Obsessive young man.
Obsessive young man who was so madly in love with someone. Anjam, once again comes to my mind. The first time the hero became the anti-hero, but the audience resonated. They connected with the character.
See, what happens is earlier, these sort of psychotic characters used to be played not by the lead character. Like Simi Garewal played in Chalte Chalte, right? She has lost her husband, and this guy reminds her of her husband, so she's stalking him. I can't imagine a Hema Malini playing this role those days. It was played by Smita Patil in Hadsa, right? So when she was not that well known. 90s, after Shah Rukh Khan coming in, people had that confidence to go up. Or Amol Palekar played in Khamosh. After 90s, the coming of Shah Rukh Khan, that was, I would say, the watershed, because even the lead actors got the confidence to play those roles without any fear of damage to their reputation. That's why Kajol played that role in Gupt, and she won the Filmfare Award. So a big change came where it was a maturing audience, it was a maturing filmmaker group, and also the actors saw that, no, really, we can do much more by being different things, not just the same sort of a hero.
Yeah, and also I remember the laughter sometimes reminds you of how the Joker happened. The Dark Knight laughter. Very, very similar, but these are trends and patterns with which you psychologically establish to the audience.
I would say Manoj Bajpayee was the first Joker in Bollywood film. He played the role of Raghavan in Ux.
Right. Can I ask both Javed Saab and you? In 2022 right now, we've spoken about the past and the iconic cult classics. Who is the villain on the Indian screen right now?
I have a question, and then I have an observation that I'll tell you later. But first, a question, and it is going to be very important. Your response will be very important, because I have to take a decision about a script, and believe me, this audience will make me take the decision. The kind of villains you had, say Shakal and Mugambo, Gabbar was rural. These are urban villains. Not urban Naxals. So tell me, would you like to see that kind of a villain again? A new, that's larger than life villain.
Raise your hands if it's a yes.
Will it interest you? No? The response is not very, very warm, There are very few people who want to see a big villain like that in fantasy land with his own empire and so on. They don't want to see it now. Like the kind of villains we had in James Bond movies and so on. You don't want him. Okay. Now, another thing, so I will not make that. So, honestly, I'm not joking. I'm serious about it because I wanted to know your reaction. Another thing, I have an observation. I don't know how many people have thought about it. I have serious problems. I had, thankfully, now they are stopped, with the rape scenes of the films. Because that is immoral, that is ugly, that is indecent, ultimate indecency. That is a different topic. But I think sex in any condition is a very serious business. You can't laugh and feel sexy. That's not possible. तो विलन जो है वो अब बचकर कहाँ जाए? अरे भाई तुम हंस रहे हो, तुम क्या करने वाले हो? कुछ नहीं हो सकता तुमसे. मेरा ऐसा ख्याल है. I don't know how many people agree. You see, I mean, when it is mutually consented sex, कोई जोक अगर हो जाए तो then you take a little time. फिर आपको थोड़ी देर रुक जाना पड़ता है. तो ये ह्यूमर का सेक्स से कोई वास्ते नहीं है. ये जोक्स और हंसना जो है इज टोटली एंटी सेक्स. तो ये इतने दिनों तक विलन हंसता रहा रेप सीन में, नोबडी ऑब्जेक्टेड. ये मुझे बहुत खराब लगा. एक द मोस्ट सेंसिटिव, द मोस्ट इमोशनल villain I have seen in a film, and you must get the copy of it and see for this particular scene. There was a film made in perhaps 60s or late 50s, Zameen Ke Tare, where my ex-wife Honey, who was a kid that time, 5 years old or 6 years old kid, and her elder sister Daisy Rani, who was perhaps 9, they were the major characters. They were the main character. And Honey's mother dies, and then there was an emotional song in the background while the child was sobbing, and the sob was so mechanical and whatever. So she was doing like this, and there was a song, "Maa na mare bachpan mein kisi ki maa na mare." So after that, both these children decide to go and find God and talk to him that where is her mother and why don't you return her so much, something of as therapy as that. So these both children leave the house and they are walking, meeting different people, going through different experiences, and lo and behold, ultimately they meet a gang of dacoits. And the dacoit is an overweight, heavy, tall giant like a man with a scar on his face, big moustache, black safa, and that belt, bullet belt, and so on and so forth. So he is a perfect Indian film dacoit. So I'll have to say it in Hindi, इसलिए कि dialogue हिंदी का है, वो English में हो ही नहीं सकता. तो वो कहता है, बच्चों तुम अपनी माँ को ढूंढने निकले हो, ये लो ये फल खा लो. तो वो बच्चा क्या कहता है, जो हनी थी, वो शी वाज प्लेइंग अ बॉय, ये फल मैं नहीं खाऊंगा. क्यों नहीं खाओगे बेटा? इसलिए कि तुम डाकू हो, तुम लुटेरे हो, तुमने लोगों का खून किया है और उससे फल लाए. तो ही कैसे मुझसे ऐसा मत कहो, ऐसा मत कहो, मैं कभी तुम्हारे फल को नहीं नहीं मेरे बच्चों, नहीं ऐसा मत कहो, तुमने मेरी आंखें खोल दी. तो डाकू ठीक हो गया. That 5-year-old child refused an apple and the dacoit was reformed. And he was crying like a baby with those big moustache and safa and that tika. I loved that scene. I have seen that film thrice only for this scene.
Thank you.
Same thing in Pran Jai Par Bachan Na Jaye, same thing. उसको गाली देता है, within 5 minutes he's reformed. ठीक हो गया. It takes a good scolding from the lady or the boy in this case for them to reform.
I guess we need more characters like that in today's world right now to trigger the conscience and to get something going for all of us. Okay, now let's make this a very interactive session. I would request the volunteers to go with the mic. When was the last time you get a chance to ask questions to Javed Saab right here and Balaji Vittal? I would say any question is a good question as long as it's a short question and to the point.
हेलो, नमस्कार जावेद साहब, विट्टल साहब और अरविंद. जनरली जो कैरेक्टर लिए जाते हैं वो निजी ज़िंदगी से कहीं न कहीं प्रेरित होकर लिए जाते हैं. तो गब्बर सिंह भी क्या आपके जीवन में कहीं ना कोई ऐसा कैरेक्टर आया जिससे आपका साबका पड़ा हो, फिर वो कैरेक्टर फिल्म में उतरा हो?
देखिए, जो सोर्सेज हैं आपके राइटिंग के वो बहुत सारे होते हैं. जो निजी ज़िंदगी में होता है, जो आपने पढ़ा है, जो आपने सुना है, जो आपने देखा है, जो फिल्म देखी हैं, जो नॉवेल्स पढ़ी हैं, जो प्लेज पढ़े हैं, देखे हैं, वो सब इन्फ्लुएंस करते हैं. तो मेरे साथ तो कोई ऐसा किसी डाकू से इतना वो नहीं हुआ. हाँ, बिफोर आई वॉज राइटिंग डकैत, आई विजिटेड फ्यू jails, like in Gwalior. I met Malkhan Singh in the jail, Pullan Devi in the jail. She was in the jail that time. That was an experience talking to them. जो डकैत होते हैं फिल्म में और जो डकैत सचमुच लाइफ के होते हैं वो बिल्कुल डिफरेंट होते हैं. वो ऐसे नहीं होते हैं. हम लोग तो हर चीज़ को इतना वो कर देते हैं ना, एग्जैजरेट, और इतना टाइप कर देते हैं. नॉर्मल बात करते हैं वो उनके जैसे कोई अकाउंटेंट है, कोई चार्टर्ड अकाउंटेंट, कोई डॉक्टर है, कोई इंजीनियर, वो डाकू है। तो इसके मतलब नहीं है कि वो डाकू बन के यूं ही बात करते रहते हैं, वो आराम से बात करते हैं। उन्हें ज़्यादा जोर देने की ज़रूरत भी नहीं, उनके पास गन होती है, वो डकैत है, तो आहिस्ता से भी कहते हैं तो लोग मान जाते हैं उनकी बात। तो उन्हें इतना डायलॉग बोलने की ज़रूरत नहीं पड़ती।
Okay, I think the gentleman in the brown t-shirt, he was raising his hand. If you could just take the mic to him, please. Yes. Please raise your hand for any questions. So Javed Saab, yes, after this we'll come to you. Javed Saab, before we get to the mic, जब आपने ये सवाल किया था, do you want characters like Mogambo, do you want characters like Gabbar? I saw this little kid on that front row with a green t-shirt raising his hand. If that inspires you and motivates you to...
You raise your hand?
He raised his hand.
Good. वो कहता मैंने नहीं किया।
Because मैंने उसको देखा हाथ उठाते हुए तो मुझे लगा उसने हाथ उठाया होगा। अब वो डर गया लगता है। Okay, yes sir.
नहीं, तुमने हाथ उठाया था।
On video है। Yes sir.
Javed Saab, it is a pleasure to be present here to see you. My question to you, apart from Gabbar Singh and Mogambo, who is the next villain you like most?
कौन सा ऐसा विलन है जो आपको बहुत अच्छा लगता है जावेद साहब? जो some villain you have really admired?
There was a villain in Mamta, a film made by Asit Sen, and Suchitra Sen was the heroine, and her husband was a villain. He had a great sense of humor. He never threatened. He put his threats in a very light, comic manner, but he was really hateful. You really hated him. मुझे याद है that he has gone away from her life, and one day she comes home and enters her bedroom. He's lying on the bed. कि तुम यहाँ कैसे? क्यों आए हो? क्या चाहते हो तुम? ये वो 4-5. तुमने तो सवालों की बौछार कर दी। पहले सवाल का जवाब ये है कि पत्नी के बेडरूम में पति नहीं होगा तो कौन होगा? दूसरे सवाल का जवाब ये है, अच्छा ऐसे करके तू, उसका जो स्टाइल था वो कभी भी सीरियसली थ्रेट नहीं करता था। मुझे बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग विलन लगा था वो। कहीं कहीं आते रहते हैं पिक्चरों में। या मैं तो हिंदी फिल्म की बात कर रहा हूँ। Same villain, but he was very good. He was very effective. Although I saw the picture was released in 1965, I was 20 that time, but I still remember him.
And once Dharmendra was asked what was his experience working in Kolkata, because he shot the Hindi film in Calcutta. So he said that I love working with that villain, that man. I'm forgetting his name. Is Kali for the Chakraborty or something like that. No,
But he was very good. He was very good.
sorry, I'm done.
Okay, the gentleman has been raising his hand for a long time there, to the right. Yes, sir. Yes.
आपका जितना डेंजर विलेन था वो लोग शादी क्यों नहीं किया है? हम लोग किसी का वाइफ नहीं देखा है। शाकाल का नहीं था, आपका
Sir, ये शायद this question deserves a huge round of applause for the analysis that you have done.
ना, जब आप कैरेक्टर लिख रहे थे, क्या बैक ऑफ द माइंड कोई काम कर रहा था कि शादीशुदा आदमी कैन बी अ गुड इंडियन विलेन?
बालाजी दा, इन्होंने आपके रिसर्च को भी हरा दिया।
You will see शादीशुदा villains in many films, but they are a much more realistic picture. You see, as he asked me, what was the nationality of Mogambo? Mogambo had no nationality. These characters, they don't have families. That is their USP. They are a universe in themselves. If you will show his wife, his children, his brother, then he'll look like another human being. You see, that was why I gave the example of James Bond. Now, James Bond is a hero, but James Bond has no family. Suppose in one film you show James Bond's mother, he will cease to be that kind of a hero. He'll become human. So they are superhuman people. They don't have wives and children and aunts and uncles and grandmothers and nephews and nieces. They are themselves. That they are complete. They don't need
If
anybody.
I can, yeah.
So I'd like
just
to
add to that.
Yeah.
After Godfather, that changed in Bollywood. If you look at Dharmatma, which was directly after Godfather, there it showed Dharam Das as a family man. He was a devout, he had a wife, he had a loving son, daughter, jiski shaadi attend kar raha hai. And that became a landmark film in Bollywood after Godfather, right? Because if you look at films like Vidhata, Dilip Kumar actually going and pleading with the other dons to say, mere grandson ko mat maro. Very similar to Don Vito Corleone pleading for his son Michael's return to America, right? If you remember that. Or even in the Sarkar series, where it shows Subhash Nagde as a family man. Achar kha raha hai, he's playing carom board, watching TV with his family. So after Godfather came a very different genre of the mafia boss, who's shown to be a businessman. So it's a good question.
Yeah, please.
बट बाद में वो प्रोड्यूसर को पसंद नहीं हुआ और डायरेक्टर ने थोड़ा चेंज कर दिया. आपने क्या फाइट किया है, वो छोड़ के आ गया कि आपने काम कर लिया?
मैं सवाल ठीक से समझा नहीं हूँ, लेकिन कोई बात नहीं, मैं अपना हिसाब से जवाब दे दूँगा. तो ये तो रोज़ करते ही रहते हैं पॉलिटिशियन, मैं भी एक दिन कर लूँ तो क्या. वो सवाल कुछ होता है, जवाब कुछ और दे देते हैं. तो एक तो generally, with all due respect and with all humility, not many directors and producers would intervene or interfere in my script or Salim Javed's script to the extent we have not experienced that. कभी-कभी हो जाता है कि वो हो जाती है, स्टेल हो जाती है पिक्चर. एक पिक्चर हमारी थी आखिरी दाव, which was not very successful, although the villain was the main character. Villain was the main character and he had a very, very cool tongue-in-cheek attitude. लेकिन ये कि वो पिक्चर बनने में इतना टाइम लग गया, and perhaps it was not ideally cast also. The casting was also, casting had left a lot to be desired and so on. And the work of the director was also not of that class which it should have been. The picture remained somewhere there, and that it did not create that impact. But the villain of that आखिरी दाव was a very interesting character, but वो वेस्ट हो गया. कई बार ऐसा होता है. मेरी एक और दो पिक्चर ऐसी है जिसमें विलन बहुत अच्छा था, लेकिन वो उसका इम्पैक्ट आ नहीं पाया. Not that they interfered, not that, but somehow performance, location, costume, get up, things go wrong sometimes. तो वो नहीं हो पाया. चलो ऐसा. You win some, you lose.
So we're almost nearing to an end to this session, but I'd like to answer your question in one line. Don't spoil my childhood by imagining Mogambo getting scolded by his wife in the kitchen. That cannot happen. That should not happen, because he's been my childhood dream and fantasy for a long time. Let's not break that image. On that note, I'd like to end.
Moral of the story that if you want to be an immortal villain, remain single.
And on that note, I like to end, of course, by launching the book right here.
No, she won't.
Yeah.
Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah.
जावेद साहब, हम लोग छोटे थे तब से सुन रहे हैं कि मंदिरा दासी थी, उसने दिमाग खराब कर दिया, या शूरपणखा थी, the women in Indian mythology. पर जब हम हिंदी सिनेमा की बात करते हैं तो वो जो बदमाश औरत होती भी है, like you mentioned सिमी ग्रेवाल, उसके ऊपर एक प्रेमनाथ बैठा होता है, या मनोरमा को हम दिखाते हैं सीता गीता में, तो there is some comedy element added to the women. Do you think that's going to change? Are we going to see women in more negative characters?
This is a great ambition. One must admire it, respect it. She is very unhappy. क्या आप हमारे औरतों को बुरा क्यों नहीं दिखाते हैं?
No.
क्या ये क्या है?
No, जब बुरा दिखाते भी हैं तो या तो
दिखाते भी तो थोड़ा सा.
Comedy.
अच्छा, और होता क्या है कि when we traditionally when we used to show these vamps, now we don't have vamps and villains anymore in the film. वो मोना डार्लिंग होती थी. वो ब्लॉन्ड है, उसकी विग होती थी, सिगरेट पीती थी होल्डर के साथ, नादिरा, हेलन, बिंदु, तो दे वर अन इंडियन. तो वो इंडियन नहीं होती थी, बिकॉज इंडियन औरत तो साड़ी पहनती है और बहुत ही अच्छी होती है. तो वो ये हम जो वैम्प्स होती थी जनरली दे यूज्ड टू बी द साइड किक ऑफ द विलन, इसलिए कि वो क्लाइमेक्स में फाइट सीन चाहिए था, उसमें वो वैम्प हेल्प नहीं करती है हमारा. और एक एक्शन सीन वो कंपलसरी होता है, कंपलसरी ब्लाइंड था कमर्शियल सिनेमा का एंड में जब हीरो और विलन की फाइट होती, तो उसके लिए हमको थोड़ा सा ब्रॉन की ज़रूरत होती थी विलन में, इस वजह से. बाकी ये कि फैक्ट ये है कि उसी सोसाइटी में डोंट बी डिसअपॉइंटेड. I think in future there will be films where the protagonist or antagonist will be women. It will happen. You see, in a society where women are not allowed to be very active, which was so, things are changing, but there is a lot to be desired even now. तो वो villain भी नहीं होगी. Most of the pictures were hero oriented. Even today they are male oriented. So उसमें विलन कैसे कितना आप कर देंगे एक औरत को, कर भी देते हैं कभी कभी, लेकिन अल्टीमेटली विलनी की भी जो अल्टीमेट कंट्रोल होगा वो मैन के हाथ में होगा.
And with that note, we end the session today. Kitne aadmi the? Such a fabulous audience. Thank you so much. I like to end with a single line. It's iconic that for someone who's written some of the cult classic scripts for Indian cinema, cult classic songs of Indian cinema, it is also Javed Saab, who in real life turned out to be the hero for all the writers of Indian cinema. For the first time ever, writers in Indian cinema got the respect, love, and recognition they deserve because of this gentleman and what he did for Indian cinema. Can we have a huge round of applause for that? A quick photograph for the book, ladies and gentlemen. This is Pure Evil, the Bad Men of Bollywood. Thank you so much. You've been a fabulous audience. Please give yourself a huge round of applause as we end this.
Balaji's books are available outside at the bookstore. You can purchase them, and I'm sure he'd be happy to sign copies for you.